Hello, everyone.
Hi, guys.
How you doing, Shay?
I'm doing good. Brett, how are you today?
Good. I'm doing well. I'm excited for this.
Yeah,
You
this
know,
is gonna
I,
be a good one.
I want to hang out here just for a minute before we actually get started. Love to ask some questions of everyone who's watching right now. Please, if you can, toss some info into the chat messages for us. Shay and I'd love to learn a little bit more about you while we wait for the last couple people to join here. So first and foremost, I'd love to just know where you're all watching from. Are you in the United States? Are you abroad? What state are you in, or what country are you in? I see some, oh, Kalispell, beautiful. Yeah, Montana's gorgeous. Florida as well, awesome.
Close to me. Nice.
Hey, Phil from Canada. Oh, we got people from everywhere. This is awesome.
Everybody's getting ready. They're ready for those holiday ads, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shay, I think it's perfect timing for some of the changes that have just come out. I love that we're able to present this and give a little bit more insight into strategies and tips for Q4. Next thing I want to ask, I'm just kind of curious because I know we're quickly approaching Cyber 5 or Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and I'd love to know, does anybody have lightning deals or best deals already lined up for that holiday weekend?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's something that I've been talking to my clients about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully you have everything already situated. And I see coupons from David. Great.
Nice.
Absolutely. That's a great way to do something good for this holiday season. A couple more coupons. I haven't seen anybody say lightning deal yet.
Okay.
Okay. There's one, two. Perfect.
Got a couple out there.
So we got a couple people using lightning deals. I'm just kind of curious. Anybody using anything like from external sources? Anybody using any sort of maybe that new Amazon attribution or anything like that? Couple Facebook ads. Great. Yeah, David. So I think I saw your name before that, David. Looks like you're using a couple different methods. That's great. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this, Shay. I'd love to just kind of start. We have some overview of what we're going to talk about and everything. So let's just go ahead and dive into it and give these people some value here.
Awesome. Sounds good. So before we get started, let's take a moment just to introduce ourselves. My name is Shae Phelps Peden. I'm one of the account managers here at Stellar Labs. I actually work with our managed services team. So I work directly with clients, actually touching the accounts every day, making sure that campaigns are set up properly and optimized efficiently. And then, of course, we have Bret Darby joining us as well. He's an account director on the same team.
Yeah, hi everyone. I work directly with Shay and the rest of our managed services team, and I'm an account director here working on high-level strategy for brands and resellers just like yourselves.
Yeah,
We're definitely excited to dive into this. Shay, do you want to go ahead and just introduce us to some of the topics that we're going to be covering today?
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about those. We want to make sure that we can get as much value out of our time today as possible. So we're really going to focus on these 5 topics. Let's start by recapping what we saw in 2018. There's nothing better that you can do than kind of learn from the lessons that you've already had. So we're going to start by taking a look back before talking about Prime Day. It's hard to believe it was just a couple of months ago, but there's definitely some great takeaways from Prime Day that we can apply to Q4. I will follow that up by talking about sponsored product strategies and the best way to use those during Q4 before we pivot and talk a little bit about sponsored brand tips. Those are two top topics that we get a lot from our clients. We want to make sure that we cover those. We'll wrap up today by talking about the display advertising. There's a lot going on there with Amazon right now, and it's super exciting, especially for this busy quarter.
Absolutely, Shay. And so I want to start stuff off here and just kind of show somebody a pretty interesting statistic here. This is a big number, $10 billion. That's Amazon's 2018 ad revenue, and it's expected to outpace that this year for sure. If you look back at previous years in 2017, that was 4.7 billion. So that's 2x. I mean, that's a huge growth from the year before. And that really equates to one thing, that there's a lot more competition on Amazon. There's a lot more sellers using advertising and putting more of their budget towards advertising. And this is big brands and small brands alike. So to kind of frame this in a way that we can all digest and understand, I put this in terms of fighter jets. So this is the equivalent of 87 F-35 fighter jets. Now, that's a lot of planes. And if Jeff decided to, Bezos could go out there and buy 87 jets and have up to the minute delivery with Prime. So maybe he'll take this idea and take advantage of it and start dropping packages down. But if not, at least this gives us a size reference for how much that is. That's a tremendous number.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
huge.
it means there's so much competition out there, and it means that brands just like yourselves are fighting for the same real estate, and likely seeing increased CPCs and increased costs year over year.
Yeah, definitely. So let's kind of talk about how we can actually own some of that real estate by diving in, Brett.
Absolutely.
All right. So, first thing up, let's talk about 2018, specifically what happened during the holidays during 2018. Again, this is super important to learn from. And let's actually look at an example that we have from one of our managed services clients.
Yeah, this is a story that I'm really close to, Shay, because I was part of this, and I know you're part with this brand now. We've both had our hands in this client's account, and we both understand the type of catalog they have. So they have a fairly consistent catalog. It's remained steady year over year in their offerings. So a lot of these efficiencies and this growth that we're seeing is really just in finding new ways to target customers. And so when we look at the outcomes year over year, we're seeing 250% increase in conversions from 2017 to 2018. We're seeing a 2x increase in top line revenue year over year. And we're also seeing that we were able to cut that ACOS in more than half. And you can look at that ad revenue number there and see that amount of growth, and you could figure out how much they actually paid for that. But that's a tremendous number of efficiencies. And I'd love it if we could just kind of dive into how we actually did that, Shay, because I think that's something that's not often discussed.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about how we did it.
Yeah, and the first step here is just cutting out risky targets. It's figuring out what works and what doesn't. And to do that, you have to look at different time periods. You have to look at the aggregate and look at a long time period, and you have to look in the immediate. This takes a little bit of training, a little bit of skill, but we're hoping to show you guys some tips and tricks here throughout this webinar so you can do the same thing.
Yeah. And then, secondary advertising based on needs. So, really understanding your inventory and, also understanding if you're going to be out of stock of something by December 21st or sometime in the holiday season, you really need to think about how you're going to advertise that, how you're going to pace yourself. It's super important during this time for our sellers to really stay informed about their sell through rates and what's really going on there. So, understanding how your advertising impacts your inventory, so important.
Mhm. And that's a great point to transition into what you have to focus on. Which products are actually giving you a return? And we chose to focus on more of their mature products in their catalog that had high conversion rates, that were successful, and help increase the overall sales volume for those products, rather than forcing some of the newer items to get a lot of placements. There's a different strategy for that, but you really have to make sure you're focused on products that are qualified for advertising on Amazon.
Definitely, especially during Q4. There's so many new products out there. There's so much competition, and part of that is understanding where your advertising dollars going. This is something we focused on a lot with this client. So we need to understand what makes sense to advertise. And from that, what's converting, what's not working, are there keywords that aren't working for them? Cut back on them. Making the most of your dollars during the season is so important.
Absolutely. And, we're pretty fortunate here, Shay. You and I get to use other people's money to drive success for their brand. And so our time constraints are a little bit different than the average seller. A lot of sellers are juggling priorities from inventory to lost shipments to customer service and transactional emails, all the way down to just making sure that their team is successful and the lights are staying on in their business.
Sure.
We're able to focus on driving success by focusing on where that money is going and what's successful for them. And that brings me back to a specific tent post event earlier this year where there was a lot of learnings that sellers can pull out of their account. And that's Prime Day.
Yeah, 100%. So looking back at Prime Day and really understanding what can we take from that. It's so hard to believe that July is a couple of months ago now, but there are so many great opportunities to take away and now apply that to Q4. So let's talk about how we can do that. First thing up, improve your bidding. Think about those bid modifiers. If you're not using bid modifiers by placement, I definitely recommend taking a look at that, understanding, what placements really work for your products and capitalizing on those. You should have learned about that during Prime Day. Look back, understand what happened there, and go from that. Another one, of course, is budgeting better. I know, Bret, this is something that you and I deal with every day. Understanding what your budget should be. Where is budget going? Think about different unique ways to make your budget last a little bit longer. I would love to know how many sellers, ran out of budget on Prime Day. I know for us, we were constantly making sure that we could continue advertising. Q4 is very similar. We're already seeing so much competition. We're seeing sellers go through budgets, their daily budgets. Understand how you can budget better. A couple of recommendations that I have is really understanding your daily budget caps. Where are those failing you? Where are you running out of budgets? But also portfolio budgets. That's something that we use here a lot to really kind of understand and make sure that we have enough money to go around for those key products, those most important products that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then finally, definitely not the least of these, identify your primary targets. Understand the keywords and the ASINs that worked for you. With those products, those are still going to work now. If you had a high conversion on those earlier and you've continued to see that, make sure you're capitalizing. Make sure you're really putting the money there.
That's great feedback, Shay. And let's talk a little bit about the more in-depth side of this. Let's talk about the actual application of this. How do you do this in your business? And so let's look back at Prime Day and figure out how do you extract your bidding history? How do you pull that data out and make sense of it? And a lot of it can be done through simple ad hoc reporting, just pulling up the data in your Ignite and making sure that you're extracting some data visually. You can download some reports and run some queries against them. But it really is as simple as understanding what you were paying during that peak period of Prime Day earlier this year. And so you can leverage the CPC that you were actually paying during those days to estimate your starting bid for the holidays.
Awesome.
Go ahead and take us over to a demo, Shay. Let's look at this. So
let's look at a practical application here, Bret.
Perfect. And so what I've done here is I've already queried down to an applicable time range. So we're looking back in July. We're looking at this peak period of Prime Day. I've got a couple filters in there, really just to cut out stuff that didn't have conversions, stuff that wasn't working, high ACoS. And now we're just sorting by the ad revenue. So you can see that little box there around ad revenue descending. So I can see what was really driving success, which keywords were converting, which ones weren't. And the last step is really the most straightforward part of this, and also the most confusing to a lot of people. It's about looking back at that CPC and understanding what you were paying, comparing that to your bid, and seeing if you need to make adjustments going into Q4.
Yeah, super important to understand here.
And with periods like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you're going to see these spikes. So if you can at least extract some insights from previous periods that have had these spikes, you can get a much better baseline. It's not perfect, but it'll give you a better starting point than just saying, let's see if we run out of budget, or let's see if we need to increase our CPC during that time period. Yeah. So what we actually do is just compare the keyword and compare the current bid against that CPC during that time period and adjust accordingly.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, Bret, how about we segue from there and actually talk about, calculating those budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the logic is quite similar, Shay. You're going to use the daily budget and figure out exactly how much you should be compensating your current daily budget to make sure that you can run throughout the day. Now, there's a couple things you want to pay attention to. You want to consider your use of dynamic bidding, any sort of placement modifiers. You got to kind of estimate how those are going to impact your performance. And so if you were using them earlier in the year and they worked out well, you'll likely want to revert to that. If you haven't ever used them, you're probably in much better shape and can just go straight forward with adjusting your daily budgets. So go ahead and let's dive into the tool again and let's look at how you do this. And so what I've got here is filtered down by campaign. And I've also filtered this to the applicable time period, the 15th and 16th of July, which was Prime Day this year. And then what I've got here is the ad spend and the current daily budget. So Ignite is going to display that current daily budget, and then we're looking at the ad spend for those days. I can simply take that ad spend and see if I need to adjust my daily budget because that ad spend is much higher than it was or than it is currently. So it is just kind of some comparative analysis. You're going to look at one and then estimate the other. You can also divide that ad spend in half since we're looking at a 2-day window. or in 7 if you were looking at a week-long window. And that'll give you the actual average daily utilization. And so that's a great starting point as well. You're going to want to pad that number a little bit and increase your budgets above that to make sure that you can run throughout the day.
Awesome.
Yeah, and a great note to make there is if you did anything special, if you had lightning deals, and that's why I asked earlier, if you did lightning deals or had best deals or anything like that, those are other factors that you need to be considering. So when you're looking at your catalog, you'll want to make sure you're compensating for those factors as well. So let's talk about that last tip that you had, which is paring back on your targets. This is figuring out what really worked during Prime Day and what wasn't working. This is a great opportunity for you to cut out some of that wasted spend in advance and at least temporarily pause it during these higher cost periods to make sure that you're not being surprised when your conversions aren't quite what you expected. The other thing to note here is ASIN targets. You don't want to neglect ASIN targets. I know you and I use these regularly, Shay, and we see a lot of leverage with them because they do allow you to get some placements that are harder for sellers to get. You can get directly onto detail pages, and you can also get into checkout pages by simply targeting the most applicable ASINs. So an important thing to note here is everyone's fighting for traffic during Prime or during Cyber Monday and Black Friday and leading up to the holidays with this shortened window this year. So as everybody's fighting for that, it means inevitably your competitors and similar offers are going to get some of that traffic. And so you have the opportunity to target those ASINs directly and steal some of those sales from them once they've already done the initial acquisition by getting that first click.
Yeah,
so rather
got to take advantage of that opportunity there, Bret.
Exactly. And so I would highly recommend anyone who's got some advantageous targets, you've got some ASINs that work well, target them. Make sure that you're using that as a complementary strategy to targeting your keywords at top of search.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, how about we talk a little bit more about sponsored products? This is a topic that, I'm sure most sellers on this call or on this webinar are already familiar with, understanding how that should really fit in with your overall strategy, but you don't want to neglect this during Q4. So let's start by talking about what's important to keep in mind when we're talking about those sponsored product ads. So first things first, we want to focus on making sure that anything that we're advertising with those sponsored product ads are retail ready. And what do I mean by that? Bret, you and I see tons of products every day. We see lots of listings. We've seen great ones, we've seen not so great ones, but let's understand what really makes it retail ready and what makes it ready for a consumer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's get started. First thing first, I always say make sure that you understand or that you have a great title and a great description. We've talked about this in previous webinars. It's one of the first things that's going to be seen by a shopper. It's really got to explain what your product is. It's got to get that message across. That's one thing that contributes to it, and it's super important. Another one, inventory. No buyer ever or no shopper ever wants to actually see a low inventory tag on a product page. So keep that in mind. Make sure you have enough inventory. The buy box, super important. It's another thing that we talk about with our managed services clients quite often. You got to make sure that you own the buy box if you're going to advertise. You can't advertise that product if you don't own the buy box. Other things, photos, super important. Can't stress photos enough, especially with our shopping habits today. So often you look at a couple of photos and you decide, yes, I'm going to buy this. No, I'm not going to buy it. And then, of course, that social proof. So those ratings and those reviews, all very important. Those all contribute to making sure your product is retail ready. Some other things you want to think about, having infographics, making sure that there's some lifestyle photos, A+ content, formerly EBC. Super important for kind of telling your story as a brand and telling the story of your product. When we see that A+ content, typically for my clients, I see a higher level of conversion for those products. So if you can include that, videos, comparison charts, you're just bringing some kind of additional ammunition to those retail or to those products to make sure that they're retail ready. One thing I always kind of remind my clients, Bret, and you and I were talking about this a few days ago, is if you have a product, is it ready to be presented in a brick and mortar store? If the packaging's not right, if it doesn't tell a story by simply having your shopper look at it, it's probably not retail ready. So I definitely recommend Amazon sellers think about it in a very similar way. If it's not ready to go on the shelf, be presented to shoppers in a big box store, it's not necessarily ready to be advertised either on Amazon.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, Shay. I think sometimes you just have to simplify the problem and really think about it from yourself as a consumer and put yourself in the shoes of someone else receiving that product. And also put yourself in the shoes of the buyer making a consideration for that product. Look at all these factors of your listing, compare it to other ones on the market, and really think hard about which one you'd purchase.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great tip there. All right. So let's segue into also understanding, splitting up your catalog. This is something that, I love to talk about. The reality is you as a seller love your products, but that doesn't mean that they should all be treated equally. It's super important for you as a seller to understand how to split up your catalog to make sure that you are advertising effectively. It's really important to make these segments before you come up with your advertising strategy. And really, let's go ahead and let's use this visualization of why that is.
Great. Yeah. And Shay, this is one that I personally love because it illustrates how you should be looking at your catalog. You kind of have to break it up a little bit. And our most successful sellers that we work with have this ingrained in the way they look at their own catalog. It's similar to Pareto's principle, 80-20 rule, that 20% of your products are going to do 80% of the work. And so this is why we've given this graphic of a cow to break out the head, the torso, and the tail. And we'll kind of go into each and show you what each part is of your catalog.
Awesome. Let's start with the head.
Cool. So the head section is the top 20% of your catalog. These are the most successful products. These are the ones that are doing a majority of your sales. They are the higher velocity ASINs. And this is really where you want to focus a majority of your budget in Q4. It's going to give you the best return in most all cases. And it's a great opportunity for you to further drive success on ASINs that are already established. They're very, very likely retail ready. And they're definitely going to give you the best bang for your buck going into Q4.
Awesome. Well, how about we look at some advice to really take advantage of those head products?
Let's do it.
The first thing up is day parting. This is also known as ad scheduling. If you're not familiar with it, I definitely encourage you to look into it. Our tool Ignite allows you to schedule these ads. It really helps allocate your budget. And during Q4, it's going to be so important to make sure that your budget lasts throughout the day. So this really allows you to stretch it a little bit further. If you understand like, hey, I have more sales later in the day, you can take advantage of that through day parting and ad scheduling. Another thing to consider is that dynamic up-down bidding. You want to stay on top for these products of yours. Your head products are the ones that you need to make sure that you're winning that advertising real estate on, especially during Q4. Bret and I can't say it enough. The competition is really fierce this Q4. So anything that you can do to help bump the opportunity of you winning the placement, you need to take advantage of. And that goes right into placement modifiers. If you have a high ROI on certain placements, definitely take a look at that. I encourage all of my sellers to understand where they actually convert the best at, what placements bring in the most sales, and then let's take advantage of that by utilizing those modifiers.
Yeah, we had a great question come in here, Shay, and I just want to touch on it really quickly because it is very situational and it's case by case. Somebody's asking how much inventory should they have on hand for these head products? How heavily do you actually stock these? And I'm going to answer it with kind of a generalization. I don't want to give specifics because it is very specific to your exact case. But you can use some data within Amazon to better estimate how much. They do have reporting, especially if you're using FBA, inside of your fulfillment tab. So go to reports, fulfillment, and you'll be able to download some inventory reports that will give you a sell-through rate. And they'll give you an estimation of how much inventory you should have. The other thing here is you should be thinking ahead about how much money you're actually allocating to these items in your advertising budget and planning accordingly. If you plan to drive 2 to 3x the traffic and you anticipate that your conversion rate is not going to just dip in half or cut in half, then you absolutely need to be thinking about that in terms of inventory. So hopefully that helps answer your question. Would love it if you could just get in contact with us if you have more questions about that.
Yeah, definitely. Bret, what do you say we take a look at that torso section now?
Absolutely. And this is the middle of your catalog. So these are the items that aren't doing a majority of your sales. they're very likely still selling and they're very likely still doing well. But some of them might not be quite retail ready. They might be just lower demand items or niche items. And so they're definitely ones that you want to put some money behind going into Q4. You want to get eyes on them and you want to have opportunities for sale. But they are going to require a smaller portion of your budget. So when you're going through and allocating budget to segments of your catalog, this is where I'd maybe focus 20 to 40% at most on your torso section of your catalog. It's going to have a little bit higher ACoS generally because they're not as competitive items, but it is a great opportunity for you to still get some sales through them. Let's go ahead and dive into some advice there, Shay.
Yeah, let's definitely take a look at this. I will say for those torso products, conservative and cautious are kind of the words I use here. So make sure that you're sticking to the dynamic down only bidding for these. You want to make sure that you really have control over what you're going to spend on these. Especially since these aren't those top sellers. Controlling that bid is going to be so important during Q4 as the competition gets more fierce. The other side of it is consider using those placement modifiers. There may not be a situation to use those for these torso ones, but if for some reason that you see that these products are selling better at top of search or on product pages, take advantage of it.
Absolutely. And we just had a question come in that's super relevant here is what are placement modifiers? And these are a feature inside of Amazon Seller Central and their campaign manager that allows you to modify your bid based on certain placements. So if you're a consumer and you query something on Amazon, let's say you're shopping for shoes or running shoes, you search for running shoes. Well, those first couple results that show up at the very top of the page are different from those results when you go to a product page and show up on that page. And so Amazon's given us this new tool to leverage that allows us to adjust our bid based on where the ad is showing up. They also give you reporting that shows you performance based on where your ad is showing up. And so all of these things really mean that you can now have better control and better leverage your bidding against specific placements. So if your product shows up and ranks very well at top of search, you can leverage that and hedge your bets by adding a modifier to make sure that your bid stays competitive for top of search. Likewise, with product pages, you can adjust accordingly for those. If you're not familiar with this, there's some great help articles online. We'd love it if you get in contact with us so we could give you a little more insight as well.
Awesome. Well, Bret, what do you say? Let's talk about the tail.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the tail's the least fun part of your catalog. These are products that don't sell well. These are products that maybe have bad reviews. They're costing you money when you advertise them, and they're not generating an ROI for you. And unfortunately, the hard thing to say here is you probably shouldn't advertise them come Q4. There might be select cases, and there's always exceptions to the rules, but in this case, most of the time, these are areas where you want to cut back on your advertising and limit it, at least during the high CPC times, because you won't realize a profit if you're throwing a lot of money towards these items. And so my advice on these is do your best to cut out as many as possible. Obviously, you understand your particular situation better than I do, but go through and see if there's things that you could cut out and save some money going into Q4. And let's look at a couple bits of advice on this one, particularly, Shay.
Yeah, let's talk about some advice here. The reality is most sellers have these products. You have that bottom 20%. They're just not performing for you. How can we make sure that we're not wasting money on those during Q4? The first thing that I would recommend here is consider cutting advertising on your 1 and 2 star products. This goes back to that retail ready conversation that we had a little bit earlier. If you have a 1 or 2 star product, there's a really good chance it's not going to convert via advertising. So just go ahead and make sure you're not wasting money on that. Cost per click is super expensive. There's just no need to spend on something that's not going to convert. It's a quick way to make sure that you have extra money to use for those other products. The other one is day parting. So that ad scheduling tool again. There's a really great opportunity to buy cheap clicks later into the night. And the reason that is because a lot of sellers are using the majority of their budget up front during the beginning of the day. So you may get to 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. A lot of your competitors have run out of budget. It's an opportunity for you to get some cheap clicks. And for those products that are at the bottom of your category or at your bottom of your catalog, you're going to need to get cheap clicks for those if you want to advertise them during Q4.
That's great advice, Shay, and I think that's really applicable to people who still have a need to get traffic to these listings. They have maybe some inventory pressures and they need to sell through it, but you don't want to lose money doing that. And this is just a great opportunity to get some low-cost clicks using Ignite and day parting.
Awesome. Well, Bret, how about we segue over and let's talk about sponsored brands?
Great.
So we've talked about sponsored products, but we always get a lot of questions about, what's the best use for a sponsored brand? And it's really important to discuss that, especially within the context of Q4. We want to make sure that you're using your sponsored brand ads to really make the most of the space that you're purchasing. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about performance versus brand advertising, because I think that's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, and we get a lot of questions about how sellers should be using these types of ad units and how brands should be using them. And sponsored brands are designed for a purpose. They are premium placements. They're at the top of above the fold at the top of search, and they're really designed to showcase your brand's image, the types of items you sell, differentiators in your catalog. But they're not necessarily the best unit for performance advertising come Q4. And so let's look at each type. So performance advertising is pretty straightforward. It's short terms, ROI driven. You're looking for results. You're looking for putting $1 in and getting a sale within 7 days and being able to measure that with ROAS, ACoS, or even tacos. Now, that's a little bit different from the vision that a brand might have of getting their name out there and establishing a presence for a particular category. And so this is where, with brand advertising and sponsored brand ads, you're going to want to focus on more of a long-term investment. You might not get your dollars back right away. And so it's unlikely to show immediate results. This is case by case, but you're going to want to focus on an overall lift in sales over the long run. So you really have to have capital to invest in sponsored brands. Now, there are select exceptions, and we'll touch on those in a minute, but this is just a great way to separate these two different ad units out and look at them through their own lens, because there are differences in them in the way they're going to behave and perform for you.
Awesome. Well, how about we start by talking about an ad that is definitely not designed for performance advertising? This is one that we definitely want to take a look at because it talks to you about what you can deliver to your client. So if we're looking or to your shopper, if you look at this advertisement that we're showing right now, it's very clear that it's not for performance. It's not just a short term, like, hey, I want you to purchase this specific product. Instead, it's a little more educational. So it's actually showing off what your brand as a whole can deliver to shoppers. You have to think about it a little bit. And there's some reasons that it's not specifically designed for that performance advertising. Number one, higher cost for that premium placement. If you want to have that sponsored brand placement, you're going to pay a little bit more for it. It's just the reality of it. You're going to have a higher cost per click, and you're probably going to have a higher ACoS with it as well. The reason is that there are just fewer placements. It's all about how much real estate there is to own. There's a lot of competition for these particular ads. So that's what really makes them not necessarily there for performance. It's a little bit more for that brand awareness side. It's really important for some brands. Bose would be one of them. That would be a great example. And they also target higher in the funnel. So it's really important to think about where you're trying to target within that funnel. Definitely, as a seller, challenge yourself to think about that when you are thinking about your advertising. Where are you hoping to catch shoppers? If it's higher in the funnel, a brand awareness type campaign may be a great opportunity for you.
Absolutely. And I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Shay, that there are some use cases for these, especially in Q4 and throughout the year.
Right.
And I want to touch on a really applicable one that's great for a lot of private label brands, small to medium enterprises. This is something that everyone can start taking advantage of immediately and still see a healthy ROI from it. And this is a brand defense campaign. This is you targeting your own brand terms and names, model numbers, things like that, to make sure that you're owning that premium real estate and not giving up that sale to a competitor. This right here is an ad from Beats by Dre, and this was actually a search for Sennheiser. So Sennheiser's losing that sale to Beats because I saw their ad and they weren't doing that brand defense. So this is a great opportunity if you're in an area where you have brand search volume on Amazon to make sure you're defending that territory and making sure consumers find you instead of your competitor. And let's take from that and dive into a couple other little insights for Q4. So if you are using sponsored brands, how can you get a little bit more out of it? How can you make sure that you're getting a better return? And this first one, I really want to talk about because it's something we've seen have success. We've seen help sellers reduce their ACoS. And I think it's applicable to a lot of brands who are running sponsored brands evergreen. They're running them throughout the year. And this is the use of broad match modifiers. And it helps you maximize relevant reach. It helps you make sure that you're showing up to consumers who are highly qualified for your type of product. And so this first example is wireless headphones. And you'll notice the little plus sign before wireless. And that is what a broad match modifier is. It's a broad search term. And anytime you see the plus sign, it means that's an exact phrase. And so that's a requirement for that ad to serve. And so this wouldn't show up for just headphones or over-the-ear headphones. It's required that the customer also put in the term wireless. And that's because the ad features wireless products. The second one is organic dog treats. And this is another great one. If your product is reliant on it being differentiated by something like it being organic or high meat or something like that, then you want to make sure that you're setting that as a requirement for your sponsored brand ad to show up. You don't want to be buying real estate that's not going to help you convert. And this will absolutely help leverage that requirement and make sure that you're getting the best of both the exact match type and the broad match type.
Awesome. Yeah, it's really great to keep in mind. Another thing that I think it's really important to remind sellers of today are some recent updates. So with those sponsored brand budgets, there have been some changes recently. So essentially, if you're thinking about your daily budget, a lot of times you're like, okay, I've set a daily budget of $100. That's all I'm going to spend. Well, Amazon has recently made some changes to the formula that means that if you're saying that your daily budget is $100, they're actually multiplying that by 30 to account for almost a monthly budget. And then from there, they're actually going to spend your money based on that. So it's really important to think of it within that context. And instead of thinking of it as a, strict, hard daily budget, instead it's more of a 30-day budget. So if you're saying $100 a day, there's a good chance that Amazon's actually thinking of that as a $3,000 monthly budget. I think it's really important to keep it within that context because a lot of times when you go in there and you try to understand what you're spending daily, sometimes you're going above that, sometimes you're under that. So really make sure that you understand changes like that are happening.
And that's a great point, Shay. And there's other factors that play into this. So for more advanced sellers, they can use things like portfolio budgeting to make sure that they're overriding some of that. If they have a set budget for a time period, like let's say Cyber 5, well, now they can use something like portfolio budgets to make sure that they're still staying within bounds.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Bret.
Let's switch paces and let's jump over to display.
Let's segue into sponsored display. I'm really excited about the new sponsored display options that are happening within Seller Central. So let's take a few minutes to compare that to traditional DSP.
Yeah, great. And display is something that's relatively new, but it is something that helps you reach your customers off channel as well. Mm-hmm. So by off channel, I mean outside of Amazon. You can finally reach people who aren't on Amazon.com through this new type of ad unit. But to begin, I wanted to make sure we gave a little bit of education here on the differences between these two. So we're going to touch briefly on the demand side platform. Then we're going to mainly focus on sponsored display since that's applicable to most all sellers. But there is a differentiation here, and I want to make sure that it's clear to people. So DSP stands for demand side platform, and essentially it's a way for agencies and service providers to go in and buy ad real estate on other websites. So IMDb, ESPN.com, Yahoo, wherever they're buying that real estate, this is a platform that allows them to go in and do that on your behalf. Now, it really allows them to buy these programmatically. So they're able to go find customers out there that meet certain requirements. They're a specific demographic. Maybe you're targeting men from 40 to 50 years old who have interest in golf, and you're selling your product to those types of consumers. Well, this can give you that advantage. It can make sure that you're targeting that specific demographic so that Bob in Minnesota out there playing golf can make sure that he sees your ad when he checks into his Yahoo Mail, and then he hops over to ESPN to check on his fantasy team. And the same is true with sponsored display. Now, it's a simplified model. It doesn't allow you the same, quite the same functionality, but it does allow you to still reach Bob in Minnesota who's interested in playing golf. Now, the eligibility is quite straightforward. It's eligible to anyone who's a professional seller. So most of you should be professional sellers if you're running ads. I think you have to be, actually. And all you have to do is be brand registered. And most of you are likely brand registered as well. What it allows you to do is create ads that are going to target off and on Amazon and reach those customers who have visited detail pages that are your products or similar products in the same category. And it allows you to target those customers with simple ease of just a couple inputs. And you'll also get some reporting from that through placement reports that then you can quantify going forward. But let's shift paces to just focus on sponsored display right now, Shay.
Yeah, definitely. So I know I'm really excited about sponsored display. I know a lot of our clients are. So let's really talk about how we can make the most of this during the holidays. So, what we're going to do here is divide up some safe uses versus risky uses. So, let's start with those safe uses. The first thing, of course, is remarketing your top selling products. We talked about earlier splitting up your catalog, understanding really what your top sellers are. This is your opportunity to retarget any customers that have already looked at these products. It's a really great chance to bring them back in and hopefully making conversion on them this time. Another way to do this is increasing traffic with discounts or coupons. Considering doing it that way, increasing traffic is a safe way to do it, especially during the holidays where things are quite are more competitive. There's a lot of traffic, a lot of competition. This is a good way to grab some of that traffic with discounts and coupons. And then, last but certainly not least, this is awesome if you have a more expensive item or if you have an item that takes a little bit more consideration because of education that's required or for a variety of reasons. So if you're selling a product that's a couple of $100s, even a couple of thousands of dollars on Amazon, it's a really great opportunity to retarget someone who's already looked at this. I love it for that. We're already using it for a number of our clients that maybe have that longer sales cycle, that longer consideration cycle. So consider that for yours as well.
Yeah, and that's great, Shay. And that's a great example of you can use things like sponsored brands to get people into your funnel and get them to your storefront and start visiting your product pages. And then you can retarget them after that. Well, they're still in the consideration phase, maybe before they've made a purchase. So let's talk about some riskier uses, because I think these are really important. We call these out because I see sellers talking about them on forums and talking about them online, and you really have to avoid some of these. The first one is just one campaign for all your products, just taking everything and tossing it into a bucket and hoping that it works out. It's pretty dangerous because you're not able to actually measure the performance at the ASIN level yet. So you're going to see certain things where it's not working out quite right, and you're not able to see what you can do to impact that performance. You really only have a select few levers at your hand, like the bid. And so it's a much riskier use case. I would definitely prefer separating your product out by family or by individual ASIN. The next one is focusing on non-retail ready products. Serving your ad to somebody when they've seen your product is a great thing, and it can definitely get them back into the consideration phase of purchasing your product, but it's not wise if your product isn't ready for them. So if you don't have the reviews or you don't have the content to support that conversion, it's probably best to just hold off on using this at all. Zero reviews, zero chance of that this is right for you. It's pretty true that you're going to have a lot less success just tossing a new product into this. And the last one is just hoping that maybe more eyes is going to solve slow sales. You really have to check your metrics first. You need to look into your conversion rate and see if there's perhaps problems with your content or your social proof, your reviews, and check those things before you start using this type of ad unit. The worst thing you can do is just keep driving more traffic and further reduce your conversion rate and be paying for that all along the way. You really have to deduce which products do well with this. And that's why I recommend separating out your catalog and having different campaigns for each item.
Awesome. Well, now that we've got a couple of scares in there in terms of, one campaign for all your products being bad, how about we actually talk about the practical application and how we can get these set up, Brett?
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So you really just start by simply understanding whether or not you're eligible. So if you log into your Seller Central account, you look at your advertising console and you go to create a new campaign, you're going to be presented with this option if you're eligible for it. So you'll see here, sponsored display. It's still got that beta tag on it. Here's your opportunity to go ahead, test it out, set it up. This is kind of the easiest way to see if you're eligible if you have the option at this point. And, from right here, you can get started by clicking continue and creating that campaign.
Yeah, and the next step, we'll just kind of walk you through this stepper to show you how it's done. It's pretty simple, but there's some important things to note. The next step is just adding in a campaign name. So give it something clear, something that you'll understand. Maybe put the word display or a letter in there to signify that this is a display campaign. That gives it just easier metrics when you're going to deduce what's happening. The next thing is giving it a date range and giving it a daily budget. And you'll notice that all of them start out at a daily budget of $100. And I wanted to make sure to call this out, that this isn't a $100 experiment. It's not something you can just throw $100 at and decide whether or not it works for you or it doesn't work for you. It's really an investment in the future of your product and making sure you're retargeting customers who are qualified for your product. And so I like to think of this as a $3,000 investment in your product, because you're going to want to run this for at least a month. You do see better performance as you continue to run these oftentimes. You'll have to find your sweet spot for your bid, and you'll want to make sure that you've got the right products that you're using this on, but you do have to be willing to invest in this. So question I'd pose to all of you is, are you willing to invest $3,000 in this product? That's a great way to decide whether or not it's even right for you to run this.
Yeah, I love that as a kind of a qualifier as a seller. Should I be utilizing this ad type?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about picking your products. So some best practices here. Make sure that you're really focusing on those high traffic, high converting products, your top sellers. This is a great opportunity, like we mentioned earlier. But as a best practice, try to limit the family of products here. So consider having one family of products per ad group. Don't get crazy just because of the way reporting is for this. It's a little bit more scarce, so you don't have the option to boil down. So this is really your chance to kind of limit what you have, or at least sort it by products so that you can get better insights and you can grow from the reporting that you have. Because if you're not benchmarking and kind of growing and making optimizations based on what you're seeing, you're going to have some flaws in your advertising in the future.
And that takes us to the last step, Shay. I mean, it really is just a 4-step process here, and this is just applying a bid. And so you'll see that the default number is $1. And I think that's actually a pretty good place to start, because there is variability in the cost to buy these placements off channel. And so this is a great area to start. You start at $1, $100 budget, that's 100 clicks. And it is a CPC model. So you are reaching out to customers and you have the potential to spend $100, get 100 clicks, you have a 10% conversion rate, hopefully you get 10 sales out of that. So I do recommend starting around this range. I wouldn't recommend starting at like a 5-cent bid or anything. You're probably not going to see any traction at all. We have experimented with this, and you do have to give it a little bit more to get some performance out of it. And the last thing I want to touch on here is just reporting. There is a really simple way to just go check in your placement reports. So go to your advertising report section of Campaign Manager, go download a placement report, and it is going to show off-channel remarketing. And that's a great way for you to see how this ad unit is performing and see if you need to be bidding more or less along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Bret. Walking through that, I think it's super important to also mention that this is, since it's a new ad type, we do anticipate lots of changes coming to it in the future. And with that being said, Amazon is always changing. It's a lot to manage for sellers in Q4. So if you ever need any help, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We have a lot of different options and the ways that we can help you out. First up, if you're looking to keep your advertising in-house, but maybe you need a tool to help better understand what's actually happening on the advertising side of things, consider Seller Labs Ignite. It's a great tool. We use it on the managed services team, and it really gives us those insights that we need to make determinations and monitor campaigns.
Yeah, and if you just decided that this is too complex now, I mean, Amazon's evolved a lot over the last couple of years, and they're continuing to evolve at a very fast pace. So as these types of ads get a little bit more competitive and a little less straightforward, maybe it's time for you to just hand this off and let somebody else handle it. We're here for you with Seller Labs Managed Services to help cover that. Again, we do use Ignite, our own internal tool, to help automate and streamline these processes. And we also have a variety of other service offerings. So if you're looking at getting your listings optimized and overhauled, or having your buyer-seller messaging optimized, you can reach out to us for those needs as well. And the last thing before we get to questions here that I wanted to touch on is something that's really close to me. And this is something that we do every year. We call it Seller Labs Cares, and it's an offshoot of Toys for Tots. So I was part of this last year, Shay, and it was a tremendous amount of fun. I actually got to go shopping for kids I was looking from 12 to 16-year-old age range. Went in, I had a budget, and I got to go through and fill shopping carts for these kids and then go take this all and donate it to them. So it was something that's really cool. It makes us feel like a part of the community. And we'd love it if any of you want to help out, whether you want to donate or you want to just get in touch and see how you can help. Please head over to sellerlabs.com/toys for tots and learn a little bit more about that program.
Yeah, definitely. I know so many of us here at Seller Labs really enjoy giving back to the community. It's something that we try to put a lot of effort into as an office as a whole. So if you ever want to understand or know how you can help us out, help us give back to the community, feel free to reach out. Like Bret said, we would love to involve you.
Absolutely. And let's dive into some questions here. I see several questions that have come through, and I want to do my best to answer as many of these. There's far too many that I've seen so far to get to all of them. We will do our best to get back to all of you after this, but I'm going to try and just run through some of these first. And the first one that sticks out to me is, in what situation do you use dynamic up bids? And the qualifiers that I use is you need to have a campaign that's performing well to begin with. It has to be competitive. This isn't necessarily something you want to go apply to a brand new ASIN. This isn't something that you necessarily want to apply to something that's only doing a few sales. You could use sales as a qualifier for this, or you could use performance overall as a qualifier. It's really up to you, but I would focus on ones that are doing volume. So if you're selling 50 units of a product in a week or in a day, that's a good opportunity for you to try applying this. If you maybe have sporadic sales and they come through every couple days, it's probably not best for you. I'd maybe stick to down and use some of those placement modifiers to complement it. Next one. Sorry, there's quite a few here, and this one's long.
We have an engaged audience. I love it.
Yeah, no, this is great. How do you focus your budget on campaigns you prefer? Account level budget is less than some of the individual campaign budgets. Yeah, on this is my own personal anecdote. I don't like using the hard campaign level budget. I don't like using that overarching budget where you cap it and say, okay, just stop selling at this point. I would much rather reduce the number of targets, reduce the number of products you're putting in there, or reduce the daily campaign budgets for those sponsored products, sponsored brand ads. I think that's worked out better in my experience than using that hard budget within the campaign level settings. Okay, so this one, it's worded a little strange, but
yeah, let's give it a shot, Bret.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to interpret it. So I think this question is regarding the change to sponsored brand ads and that budgeting for the 30-day window. The question is that the same for sponsored products?
It's a great question.
Yeah, and the answer is yes. I mean, that's how they've been using sponsored products traditionally. And so this change to sponsored brands is somewhat new, but it's the way that they've been using sponsored products all along. So when you look at your budget, sometimes you'll see out of budget, and then you check that dollar amount, and it's $100 daily budget, and you see $105 spent. Well, that's because there's a little bit of variability in there, and they're allowing that to go over. You might see a couple days later that it capped out at $98 instead of actually hitting 100. And that's because they have to adjust for that. So they're trying to hit a 30-day window with that particular budget you've assigned to it. This next question, is sponsored display only available in the US? I can't see it in the UK site. It does roll out to different accounts. So the way Amazon does this, they roll it out to different accounts at different times. You have to think of every account as kind of its own server. It's somewhere else within their data warehouse. And so they might not just hit everything at once. They do it kind of strategically. So if you don't have it yet, be on the lookout for it. And if you don't have it in your US account yet, same thing. Be on the lookout for it as long as you meet those requirements of being a professional seller and having a brand registry. And what is a good rate? What is a good range for conversion rates?
Oh, that's
Depends.
a great question.
Yeah, and it does depend. I would look at 10% as kind of the barrier. If you're below 10%, your item's not converting that well. Amazon is a conversion engine. If you look at Google, that's a search engine. That's how you find stuff. That's how you get answers to questions. When people come to Amazon, they're looking to buy, and they're looking to do market research and figure out what products they want. And so it does have a higher conversion rate than you'll see on other e-commerce sites and off-channel. And so you want to kind of tailor your knowledge to that and think of it as 10% is kind of a okay conversion rate or a good conversion rate for some products. 50% generally means you're not driving enough traffic. If 1 out of 2 people are truly buying your product, you need some marketing dollars to put behind that and get some ads running, because that means you could drive a lot more sales if you only had more people coming to your listing.
Yeah,
So go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say, it's also really important to think about the category that you're in as well when you're talking about a conversion rate. It's very different from category to category. So that's always something that I recommend that our clients consider as well. I think 10 is a great threshold, but sometimes there can be some variation there.
And here's another, and that's a great point, Shay, actually. Like, category matters quite a bit. So you will expect to see maybe a lower conversion rate in a highly competitive category where there's a lot of available offers. You'll expect to see a higher conversion rate in an area where you're the only offer. It's a niche item or something. This next question is a great one. What do we recommend for smaller businesses with small budgets, maybe less than $100, that are in a competitive segment? How should they actually use that budget? And I think that's where it comes down to that head, torso, tail idea, is you got to figure out where you're putting your ad dollars, and you have to be somewhat selective about it. And so if you only have $100 a day, or you have limited capital to invest in this, you have to be very careful about what you pick. So I would definitely recommend looking at your catalog, looking at sales and conversion rates over time. Go download your business reports and analyze it. Figure out what's working and what's not, and make sure that you're investing where you're getting a return. Things like product launches are going to be a little bit harder for you. I shouldn't even say a little bit. They're going to be a lot harder for you if you only have $100 a day. So definitely pick your targets and figure out where to be putting those dollars. It's about being selective more than anything else.
And really, that's one of the biggest mistakes sometimes we will see sellers have, trying to spread that budget too thin, spreading it out. If you only have $100 a day and you try to put it across 20 campaigns, it's just not going to work well for you. So go back and think about, for those daily budgets, how many clicks can you actually get for that daily budget? And that's kind of a really great thing to keep in the back of your mind when you're selecting your budgets as well.
Absolutely. That's a really great point, Shay. And I think we just have time for maybe like one more question. So I'm gonna look through real quick and see. I want to get a good one here, something that'll help people. Got it. Let's do this one. Let's do sponsored brand bidding. Somebody has a question about sponsored brand bidding, and like in sponsored products, is Amazon going to lower that bid, or are they going to charge that exact amount? Amazon will lower that amount, but here's the caveat.
There's always a caveat there, Bret.
Right? It's a higher cost per click type unit.
Right.
We mentioned that there's less real estate and there's less potential placements. And you just have to think about this. Every detail page on Amazon has a variety of opportunities for sponsored product placements. You have the sponsored product ribbon at the middle, you have one at the bottom, you have them throughout, and you also show up in search results. So that's a lot of placements. And there's generally 4 to 6 placements at least in a typical results page. There's only 2 sponsored brand placements there, top of search, bottom. And so there's just not as much opportunity for you. So you have to really be selective about the keywords you're using. Use things like those broad match modifiers to make sure you're showing up. But you are going to be expecting to pay a lot closer to what you're actually bidding than you might maybe with sponsored products. Cool. And I think that's all we have time for today. Again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And hopefully you all have a great Q4. Happy Cyber 5. And please be in touch if you have any questions or anything else we can assist with.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks again for your time, Shay.
Bye. Have a good one, guys.